So God is, in fact, outside the bounds of atoms, light waves, gravity. He's outside those bounds. And therefore, God is metaphysical. We can't put God in a test tube, in a beaker, in an Erlenmeyer flask, or an electron tunneling microscope, or a thermal ionization mass spectrometer. We can't put him in any of those instruments. He doesn't fit. Right? But the stuff that we can put in those instruments and test can point to God's existence. Can point to God's existence. Now back to our friends on the other side of the aisle, they would say, all this stuff is here and is explained by natural processes. There is no God. God did not create this stuff. And they would say, as soon as you introduce God into the argument, you've turned it in from, it's not science. It's not science, it's metaphysical. It's not science, it's metaphysical religion. And your response is, you know what your response is? As soon as you say God cannot create this stuff, that's not science. That's metaphysical. They are using a metaphysical argument against our metaphysical argument. They don't realize it. Because if argument A, whatever that argument is metaphysical, then not A, by definition, is also metaphysical, right? So when they declare that God cannot have his hands in this, they are making a metaphysical statement, and it's not science. It's not science. So that's your response to those who would argue that way. So, is there proof that God exists? Yes. We're going to look at those proofs. So when we study nature, some scientists would get up on these blocks and just try to discover their arrangement, discover their colors, look at it, and they can never see the forest for the trees. They'll look at this all day and not see God speaking to them, right? You see what that says? All of creation says, God screaming, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I am here. Listen to me. All right, so how are we going to prove God's existence? Well, we're not going to be here next Sunday. Well, y'all will be here. We're not going to be having class next Sunday because the Knoxes are going to be here. And they're going to be sharing with us what they're doing in Japan. Then the next Sunday is Western Day. We're not going to have class that day. So it's going to be 3 weeks from today when we have class again, the 25th. And when we do that, we're going to start with a cosmological argument. Remember the very first class I said moral relativism, the cosmological argument, the problem of evil. By the time we're done with this, you're going to know this stuff. Well, next class, we've talked about moral relativism. Next class, we're going to study the cosmological argument. So I want to give us just a brief overview, kind of let these start to sift in your minds a little bit, of these different arguments or different proofs for the existence of God. So the cosmological argument proves God's existence by asking these questions. Why does something exist instead of nothing? Why does something exist instead of nothing? It's a good question. And it also asks, what caused the universe to exist? Kind of the same types of questions. And this can be pictorially represented as a line of dominoes falling. Something causes those dominoes to fall. What's the cause? What got everything kicked off? Now, there are some limitations to this cosmological argument. Like I said, it's not going to prove the God of the Bible, but it is going to prove that a God exists. So it asks, why does something exist instead of nothing? What caused the universe to exist? And it can be pictorially represented as a line of dominoes falling. The next proof that we're going to be looking at is the teleological argument. The teleological argument. Teleological argument. This argument proves God's existence by examining three things found in creation. Those things are information, like the information encoded in our DNA and our genes. It examines complexity. Complexity. One of the scientists was asked, if during Darwin's age they looked on the cell as a Buick, and with our understanding now, let's say they thought it was a Buick, what would it be now? And one of the scientists says a whole galaxy. That's what the cell would be now. So the complexity inside our cells, just one cell, how it changes compounds, makes different chemicals, produces energy, mind-boggling. One cell. And we don't even talk about how cells form tissues, how tissues form systems, and systems form a human. If we just look at one cell, it speaks volumes to God's complexity. And design. Why is it that we have an aperture called an iris on our eye with a lens behind it and a place for that light to focus behind? That design is irreducibly complex. Someone had to design it. Typically, this argument is pictured with a watch. The first guy to kind of really formalize this argument said, what if I'm walking through the forest and I see a watch laying on the ground? Do I think that it just happened there by chance, or do I think a watchmaker made it? That's the typical how this argument came, how it's typically couched and presented, so it can be pictorially represented by a watch. And lastly, the problem of evil, and sometimes you'll see it, the problem of evil and suffering. Why is evil there? If God was all-powerful, couldn't He stop evil? So those are some of the questions. And like I said, this argument actually began as an argument against God. But when we examine it, once you allow evil to exist, you're actually allowing good to exist. And if good and evil exist, which we would all say evil and suffering exist out in the world, when we say they exist, then good has to exist as well. Okay? All right, so no conclusion points today because they just didn't make it in there. But we do have some homework. That page, the next page over is homework. And it basically just has you go through Scripture, and it shows how different people or groups of people have suppressed the truth. And it's a good, just to help you know that not only do people suppress the truth, but the Bible details how and gives you some examples of suppressing the truth. So when we come back, we will talk about the cosmological argument, kind of give a full philosopher's version of the argument, which will probably be more than enough for us, but they have to be very particular how they word things so that they're not guilty of faulty arguments. So we'll look at that next time. All right. Charlie, would you lead us in order of prayer?